Hello and welcome to this training session on how to use the IMDRF adverse event terminology as set out in the guidance document, IMDRF Terminologies for Categorized Adverse Event Reporting, Terms, Terminology Structure and Codes, and related documents which can be found on the IMDRF website. You will note that throughout this presentation the term adverse event will be used. This term is synonymous with the term incident or serious incident that are used in some jurisdictions. The precise criteria for reporting adverse events are defined by each regulatory authority and are not subject to this guidance document or training presentation. In this session, you will learn about the IMDRF adverse event terminology and the objectives that the IMDRF had in mind when developing the terminology and coding. You will be introduced to the details of the terminology, including the various annexes and the coding structure, and an overview of how the system can be used will be provided. We will also look at how the terminology is kept up to date and the steps to follow to request an addition, modification, or deletion of an adverse event term. Lastly, we will summarize the expected benefits of adopting the globally harmonized system for assisting with adverse event reporting. So let's begin with a definition of IMDRF adverse event terminology. It is a standardized set of terms with associated alphanumeric codes which can be used for reporting medical device-related adverse events globally. It is designed to enhance and not replace existing national or regional adverse event reporting requirements. The IMDRF had several key aims in mind when it developed the adverse event terminology as a standardized tool for global use. The first was to establish a harmonized terminology and corresponding codes reporting of adverse events related to medical devices that could be used across the world. Secondly, was to establish a harmonized terminology which would assist in improving the accuracy and the consistency of adverse event reporting at a global level, thus simplifying the analysis of adverse event related data and facilitating the early detection of potential safety signals related to the use of medical devices in the marketplace. It was envisaged that this would greatly assist in the identification and the initiation of timely and prompt corrective measures by manufacturers where necessary, for example, medical device recalls and field safety corrective actions. It was also envisaged that it would provide regulators with better oversight of the performance of the devices in the marketplace, allowing them to more easily identify trends and potential safety concerns and initiate actions where necessary. Lastly, and most importantly, one of the principal aims of the global harmonized adverse event terminology was to protect patients by enabling faster local and international responses to issues or problems that are identified with medical devices. The adverse event terminology, terms and codes are designed to provide a harmonized global terminology system to assist with adverse event reporting, a system that could complement and enhance national and regional systems, making it easier for those manufacturers and regulators that need to be able to operate and communicate on a global stage. The terminologies presented in the IMDRF Adverse Event Terminology Guidance document are intended to be used by two key stakeholders: the reporter, that is, those who are obliged to report to regulatory authorities in accordance with the relevant regulations of each jurisdiction, whether manufacturers or healthcare professionals, by regulatory authorities themselves, who collect and process information and data to monitor and analyze adverse events so that they can better protect the patient and public health. While this guidance document does not provide a definition of an adverse event involved a medical device or an in vitro diagnostic device, it does, however, provide terms and codes that can help in clearly communicating such events when they arise. As stated earlier, the precise criteria for reporting adverse events are defined by each regulatory authority. When an adverse event occurs, There are several questions that need to be considered by both the healthcare professionals and the manufacturers of any medical devices that may have been in use at the time of the event. They may need to consider what occurred. Did a medical device contribute to, impact, or influence the event? Should the event be classified as an adverse event? How serious was the event? What was the health impact on the patient or the user of the medical device? How should the event be investigated? What problem or fault, if any, occurred with the device? What was the root cause of this problem? For example, in this image, we see an unconscious patient lying in a bed. The patient is connected to an infusion pump. Has an adverse event occurred? Did the pump malfunction? Was there perhaps an overinfusion? Was the overinfusion the result of a device problem or an error in the use of the device? How should the adverse event be investigated? Will the event need to be reported to a regulatory body? The IMDRF codes have been designed and structured to assist both healthcare professionals and manufacturers to describe the various aspects of adverse events, investigations, and investigation findings. The IMDRF adverse event terminology coding structure consists of terms and codes that are clearly defined within a hierarchical coding structure. The terms describe events clearly and precisely, thus reducing the possibility of ambiguity that can arise when interpreting narrative text. The IMDRF terms are based on existing terminologies that already exist in different regions globally. In creating the IMDRF terms, the existing terminologies were reviewed, improved, expanded, or simplified. Each term is explained with a definition, and in some instances, examples are provided. The level of detail incorporated into the current IMDRF terminology is based on what was considered to be the most appropriate level for regulatory purposes. It does not intend to set out the level of detail appropriate for manufacturers. Manufacturers are welcome to create additional levels of granularity for their own internal tracking purposes. Codes. To ease the use of this terminology, in particular on databases, and to reduce the possible ambiguities of meaning, each term is uniquely identified by an alphanumerical code. The hierarchical coding structure allows for the coded terms to be logically set out in branching structures consisting of several levels. Although the hierarchical arrangement has been referred to as a coding structure, similar to ISO TS 19218, it is important to note that it is primarily the terms and their definitions that are of interest, while the codes are merely used to unambiguously identify the terms. In such a hierarchical term structure or coding structure, a more general term comprises the entry level, for example, level 1. For each level 1 term, second and in some cases third level terms, level 2 and level 3, branch off, which allow for various more detailed options for a finer description of the level 1 term. Therefore, with an increasing number of levels, the resolution and the descriptive powers of the hierarchical system grows. The advantage of a hierarchically arranged terminology or a coding structure is that a large variety of terms can be selected by users in a relatively accessible way, without the need to know all terms before using the system. Inevitably, there had to be a trade-off between the resolution of the number of levels and the number of terms or codes, and the practical use of such a system by users, including healthcare workers, manufacturers, and regulatory authorities. The IMDRF adverse event terminology is composed of 7 annexes, covering 4 set terminologies and their associated codes. It is designed to facilitate the accurate description and the reporting of 4 main areas relating to adverse events: the medical device problem, the associated component problem, the health impact for patients, and the investigation into the cause of the adverse event. The general terminology combined with the specific codes facilitates the reporting of investigations into possible causes of the event and the causal link between the use of the device, independent of whether it malfunctioned or not, and the adverse health effects experienced. All terms are closely aligned with a subset of the MEDRA terms through close collaboration between the IMDRF and MEDRA. It is recommended that adverse events should be coded to the most detailed level possible. The most appropriate code may be a level 1 or level 2 code, depending on the circumstances and the information known. It is likely that it will be necessary to use multiple terms for each annex in combination to adequately code the adverse event, in agreement with the requirements of each relevant jurisdiction. An overview of the terminologies and associated code is given in the following slides. This schematic illustrates how the IMDRF codes work together. The IMDRF codes were developed and introduced in a sequence, Annex A to Annex G. However, in practice, the codes are not necessarily used in this sequence. The IMDRF, Annex A, Annex E, and Annex F codes are usually the first codes that may be considered by a healthcare professional or a manufacturer. For example, in the previous scenario that was outlined in slide 7, in assessing the adverse event with the infusion device, the healthcare professional and the manufacturer would first consider how the problem manifested itself, the medical device problem. Did the infusion pump fail? Was the infusion pump programmed correctly? Then they may examine what impact the problem had on the patient. What were the patient's symptoms and the negative consequences for the patient? What is the patient's current state of health? Was this caused or impacted by the performance or lack of performance of the device? The manufacturer would then consider what method or methods of investigation they would need to use to find out more information about the event, using the Annex B terms and codes. They would then have to identify and categorize the investigation outcome using the Annex C terms and codes, before finally concluding the root cause using the Annex D terms and codes. Throughout this process, they may also consider specific components or parts that have contributed to the event using the Annex G terms and codes. Annex A includes terms and codes for describing problems associated with the medical device or the in vitro diagnostic device. For example, malfunction, deterioration of function, or failure that have occurred with the medical device. The IMDRF codes were specifically developed for use in post-market adverse events. However, they can be used to describe problems that occurred during clinical studies or clinical evaluations. For example, problems include problems relating to the interaction between patients and the device, problems associated with undesirable local or systemic effects due to exposure to medical device material or leaches from those materials by a patient who has an implant or is receiving treatment with a device made from them. These terms are largely based on the FDA's device issue terms and are harmonized with ISO technical specifications 192181 where possible. It is recognized that not all jurisdictions may want to code to such detailed levels. The hierarchical structure allows users to choose the level of coding best suited to their needs. In cases where the root cause is unknown and it is not possible to find an appropriate Level 1 category, it is still appropriate to code. Using Level 2 or Level 3 codes, for example, a mechanical problem term could be selected as a device problem, even if the device is still under investigation and it is not clear that the root cause was a mechanical problem. Annex B covers terms and codes for describing the type of investigation carried out on the device involved in the reported event. For example, the investigation employed relevant empirical testing of the actual device suspected in the reported adverse event in order to establish its functional and other properties and to identify possible causes for the adverse event. Relevant testing would typically be based on test methods used for evaluating safety and performance as described in the latest relevant standards. Annex C covers terms and codes for describing the findings of the investigation carried out on the device involved in the reported event. For example, it may describe a biological problem related to a natural biological process or a living organism. This may be due to a biocompatibility issue where the device causes a cellular or tissue response that elicits an undesirable local or systemic effect in the recipient or beneficiary of the therapy. The cause of this may be that the device was contaminated in some way by an undesirable presence of a toxin associated with a certain bacteria, for example, gram-negative bacteria. Annex D covers terms and codes used for describing the conclusion of the investigation. Was the cause of the event traced back to the design of the device itself or the design specification? For example, in the requirements, testing process, hazard analysis, or the implementation strategy? And if so, is it that the design of the device is not actually fit for purpose? Again, in all three investigation annexes, the hierarchical levels allow users to choose the most appropriate level of coding to use. Annex E covers terms and codes for describing the health impact, so the clinical signs, symptoms, and conditions of the affected person appearing as a result of the medical device adverse event. These terms should not be used to describe signs, symptoms, or conditions that exist prior to the adverse event. These terms are closely aligned to a subset of MEDRIT terms. This annex is organized into categories along organ systems, as well as physiological problems. Some terms appear in more than one category to make it easier to find the proper term. In these cases, each repeated term will only have one unique code assigned on the basis of its primary category. Annex F covers terms and codes for describing the health consequences of the medical device adverse event for the person affected. These can include final patient outcomes or interventions and procedures required as a result of the clinical signs, symptoms, and conditions captured using Annex E. It is likely that multiple terms will be required to fully describe the situation. For example, in the case of radiation treatment, there may have been a change in the response to treatment. The investigation could reveal that there had been a reduction in the desirable beneficial effect expected from a medical treatment, and that this was due to a lower than intended dose of radiation being delivered to a single field. Annex G covers terms and codes for describing the specific parts and components that were involved or affected by a medical device adverse event. Could a very small component, such as a simple cable grip or tie, used in tensioning or pulling or holding wires and cables, be involved? The component terms are grouped into sections to help the user to find an appropriate term. Each term appears in only one section, and some simple rules are applied in order to choose the appropriate section in cases where a term could logically fit into more than one section. Components that have multiple attributes are allocated into a section in the following order of preference: safety, measurement, optical, biological and chemical, electrical and magnetic, and mechanical. There will be some devices or adverse events where it is not possible or necessary to select an individual component code. The terminology includes a term and a code to capture these cases. So it is possible for jurisdictions to make it mandatory that a report includes at least one term or code from each and every annex. Assessing the codes is very easy. They have been made freely available for download from the IMDRF website at the link provided. The codes can be downloaded in either XLSX or JSON format and can be integrated into local systems for ease of use. Given the nature of the medical device industry and the constant introduction of new technologies, materials, designs, and procedures, it is very important to ensure that the terminology remains up to date, accurate, and responds well to the growing needs of the intended users. This is why annual maintenance is required. Adjustments may be needed to the terms and codes because of new technologies, technical updates, and innovation. There may be the need to refine definitions and terminology or to improve the clarity of meaning. As a result, the IMDRF has put in place a clear system for the annual maintenance of the terminology with a view to adding, modifying, or removing terms as required. The maintenance cycle for the IMDRF runs from March to March. Organizations may submit change requests from March until the 1st of September every year. Stakeholder organizations, for example, industry, patient associations, and medical associations can make change requests to add, modify, or delete an adverse event term between March and the end of August. Please note that individuals cannot submit a change request. Only national competent authorities or stakeholder organizations can do so. As noted, the maintenance cycle for the IMDRF runs from March to March. Organizations may submit change requests from March until the 1st of September every year. Between the 1st of September and the end of December, all change requests are reviewed by the Adverse Event Terminology Working Group, who then submit a change request to the Management Committee for approval. Following approval by the Management Committee, the updated terms and codes are then published in March of the following year. It is important that changes to the adverse event terminology should be restricted to those that are absolutely necessary. They should mainly be reserved for adaptations to accommodate technical progress. There will be new terms required as new devices, designs, and materials emerge. Frequent changes to the terminology are not anticipated. Any changes for involved parties and end users will require reprogramming of existing coding systems at the level of industry, healthcare facilities, and regulators, so change requests need to be managed with this in mind. Where terms become obsolete during the maintenance phase, these obsolete terms and their corresponding codes are not deleted, but will be flagged as inactive. These obsolete terms will be available for reference only. There is a designated web page on the IMDRF website where the most current version of the terminology is published and where the change request form can be downloaded to submit change requests. Users should remember to first refer to previous IMDRF decisions to check whether the proposed changes have already been addressed. The working group's response to previously reviewed change requests is also published on this website using the change log. The completed change request forms should be sent to the current IMDRF Adverse Event Terminology Working Group Maintenance Chair at the latest by the 1st of September each year. At the end of the maintenance cycle, the revised IMDRF Adverse Event Terminology is posted on the IMDRF website. The revised terminology annexes are then given updated revision numbers, and a change log is kept for each terminology from Annex A through to Annex G and published on the dedicated IMDRF webpage. For regulators, the use of globally harmonized terminology and codes is critical to supporting the effective analysis of safety, quality, and performance information. In addition, common terms make the exchange of information between regulators on medical device adverse events easier, more accurate, and more reliable. For manufacturers, search terminology and coding provides a comprehensive, easy-to-use coding system that can be used as part of a worldwide post-market surveillance system. The terms and codes facilitate ongoing global oversight and analysis of adverse events and the reporting of them. Finally, they provide consistency for reporting to multiple jurisdictions. This reduces the burden of managing multiple coding systems when preparing medical device adverse event reports for several jurisdictions. The use of the IMDRF adverse event terminology can play an important role in assessing adverse event reporting in the post-market period. In particular, it can help in assessing the frequency of reports, the severity of the clinical consequences, the root cause, patterns associated with specific devices, perhaps patterns associated with particular manufacturers. It can help regulatory authorities assess the compliance of manufacturers to the adverse event reporting requirements and assist both regulators and manufacturers in assessing and monitoring the introduction of new technologies. In contrast to narrative text, the use of the IMDRF adverse event terminology allows for more sophisticated approaches to signal detection, with the identification of potential novel risks and trend analysis by incident management systems, including advanced querying functions and data visualization. The IMDRF adverse event terminology was developed with the global market in mind, and the intention that it should be a global tool to facilitate and harmonize adverse event reporting worldwide. It was designed to complement and to be used in conjunction with existing reporting systems, and its use around the world is expanding every year. It is a public resource, available and accessible to all, available for free on the IMDRF website. Its use is facilitated and maintained by the IMDRF regulators and specifically the IMDRF Adverse Event Terminology Working Group. We strongly encourage manufacturers, regulators, and healthcare establishments in all jurisdictions to integrate the use of these codes into their reporting systems in order to maximize the potential benefits of a harmonized global terminology for adverse event reporting. We hope you found this training session helpful. Thank you for watching.